In 2017, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stood before an audience in Newfoundland and delivered a tearful, emotional apology to the survivors of the nation's residential school system. For a country that holds a global reputation as a polite, progressive nation, the realities outlined in his speech were harrowing, documenting decades of severe neglect, physical abuse, and the systematic deprivation of care. But the atmosphere in the room shifted during the press conference. Reporters began to push back, asking why Indigenous protesters were currently facing arrest and jail time over concerns regarding the nearby Muskrat Falls project. The questioning then turned to a sharp legal contradiction: how the government could offer a tearful apology while simultaneously fighting those same survivors in a class action lawsuit. A public apology functions as political theater, unless we examine the staggering scale of the century-long cultural genocide his speech attempted to address. In 1884, the Canadian government amended the Indian Act. This legislation made attendance at government-funded, church-run boarding schools compulsory for Indigenous children under the age of 16. This map shows the sheer geographical scale of the system. Over 130 specific residential schools were built across almost every province and territory, maintaining an inescapable reach over Indigenous communities until 1996. The government was explicit about its objective. Duncan Campbell Scott, the Deputy Superintendent of Indian Affairs, stated the policy's goal was to absorb the population and, quote, get rid of the Indian problem. The core strategy of this assimilation required severing children from their families. The state sought to systematically erase their native culture, language, and identity, replacing it with their own, as seen here with Indigenous students forced to pose with British flags. These institutions were not designed to educate. They were built specifically as a legally mandated mechanism for total cultural erasure. The execution of this policy was brutal. Police were used to physically remove children from their homes, and parents who refused to comply faced fines or jail time. Inside the schools, students were forced into regimented, institutional living. They were strictly banned from speaking their native languages, and siblings were purposefully separated on different floors to prevent them from maintaining any connection to home. Survivor testimonies ground this policy in human reality. Flora Merrick, a student for 10 years, recounted being locked in a dark room for 2 weeks simply because she tried to attend her mother's funeral. Severing a child from family love often destroys the foundation of intergenerational parenting skills, creating psychological scars that manifest in modern crises. This chart shows the baseline suicide rate for the general Canadian population between 1979 and 1994. When we plot the data for First Nations communities over that same period, the correlation is stark. The suicide rates are drastically higher, showing a trend that continues to climb far above the national average. The trauma did not end when the final school closed its doors. It compounded, engineering the deep social inequalities that remain visible across Canada today. When historical trauma is ignored and democratic avenues fail to provide redress, the pressure created by these legacies often spills over into physical civil resistance. In 1990, this tension erupted in the Oka crisis. Mohawk protesters engaged in an armed standoff with the Canadian military over plans to expand a golf course onto a sacred burial ground and ancestral forest. That standoff was fueled by a pressure cooker of unaddressed land claims and the deep mistrust generated by generations of imperialist policies. The events at Oka demonstrate that unhealed colonial wounds are not just historical footnotes. They are active forces that can lead to a breaking point. Returning to the present day, it took thousands of lawsuits to force the Canadian government into providing financial settlements and common experience payments for the survivors. This legal pressure led to the creation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a formal mechanism allowing survivors to document their abuse on the public record and demand institutional accountability. But those formal settlements sit in sharp contrast to the ongoing issues raised at Trudeau's press conference. The government continues to manage land disputes and oversee a foster care system where Indigenous children remain disproportionately represented. An apology is an acknowledgement of baseline facts, but true reconciliation requires dismantling an active, ongoing system of colonial thinking.